Rain had been falling on Boston for 9 days, and by the end of it, 2 men who had laughed at Nora Bennett were finished, and a third was begging a federal courtroom to let him keep his own last name. She walked into that ballroom as the woman hired to fix hems, the one nobody looked at unless something tore. She walked out holding an empire by the windpipe, and the strangest part was that none of them had ever raised their voices. Not once. The Ashford Winter Benefit was held in a converted customs house on the harbor, and Nora Bennett spent the first hour of it on her knees. That was the job. Marchetti and Vaughan, Atelier, sent a fitter to every event where their gowns walked, because silk was a liar, and it told the truth at the worst possible moment. So Nora knelt in the service corridor behind the coat check with pins between her lips and a thread snips clipped to her waistband, repairing a torn hem while a 19-year-old debutante checked her phone above Nora's head and never once looked down. Nora was 31. She was a size 22. She had a scar on her left thumb from a bone folder, and she could rebuild a bias-cut bodice from memory in 90 minutes. And in every room she had ever worked, she was furniture. She had learned to like it a little. Furniture heard everything. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She already knew. Mercy Colonnade billed at 11 at night, because 11 at night was when people were too tired to fight them. Margaret Bennett's lungs were turning into scar tissue at a rate the doctors described with the word aggressive, and the drug that slowed it down cost more per month than Nora made in 4. Her mother had started saying things like, "I've had a good run, sweetheart," in a bright little voice, and Nora had started leaving the room when she said them. 9 years ago, there had been money. 9 years ago, there had been a warehouse on the Chelsea side of the river with Bennet Marine Bunded painted on the brick, and a father who came home smelling like diesel and cold coffee and called her Captain for reasons she never got around to asking about. Then 11 kilos of something that had never been on any manifest. Thomas Bennett signed turned up in a container that had his seal on it. Then a very good lawyer and a very bad judge and a headline. Then 18 months of waiting for trial in a facility where a 56-year-old man's heart quietly gave up on a Tuesday. Then a foreclosure notice, and Margaret's cough starting, and the warehouse reopening 8 months later under a new name, Bruno Coastal Holdings. Nora had spent 9 years knowing exactly who did it and exactly how much that knowledge was worth, which was nothing. You could not indict a man with certainty. Cesare Bruno owned the harbor, 3 councilmen, and a charity wing at the hospital that was slowly killing her mother. He'd even sent flowers to the funeral. White lilies. She had put them in the dumpster herself and gone back inside to be strong for people. "You're doing the thing," Grace Molina said, appearing with 2 flutes of stolen champagne. Grace ran the Atelier's front of house and was the only person in Boston who addressed Nora as though she had a pulse. "The jaw thing. Who are we killing?" "Nobody," Nora said. "Yet?" Grace handed her the champagne anyway and nodded at the ballroom doors, where the noise had done something strange. It hadn't stopped. It had lowered, the way a room lowers when weather arrives. "Okay," Grace murmured. "So that's him." Nora looked. She'd heard the name the way you hear about a fault line under your city, as a fact you're not expected to do anything about. Damiano Vitale. He wasn't the largest man in the room, and he wasn't the loudest, and that was precisely the problem. He moved through the crowd at the speed of a man who had never once been made to hurry, and people opened for him the way water opens for something heavy going down. A senator's wife laughed too brightly at nothing. A waiter changed direction rather than cross his path. Nora had spent her whole life reading bodies for a living. She read his in 4 seconds and got cold. He's not pretending, she thought. Everyone here is pretending. He's the only one who isn't. "They say he had a man's hands broken at that table," Grace whispered, over a joke. What was the joke? Nobody remembers. That's sort of the point. Behind him came Enzo Marchetti, shoulders like a loading door, eyes doing slow, patient laps of the room, and beside him, all warmth and teeth, a silver-haired charmer shaking hands with everyone he passed. Renzo Fontana. Nora liked him instantly. She would think about that later, in the dark, and feel sick. Camilla Ashford found Nora at 11:40. She came in a column of pale gray silk, with a champagne flute held like a scalpel, and Gerald Thorne trailed after her the way he trailed after anything with a bloodline. Thorne owned the atelier. He'd hired Nora 9 years ago at exactly the moment she was most desperate, and he'd been very pleased with himself about it ever since. "There she is," Camilla said, and pitched it. Not loud, just wide, enough to gather a semicircle. "Gerald, this is the girl I was telling you about." "Nora," Gerald said. Camilla's had a note. "About the fitting rooms," Camilla said, examining Nora with real curiosity, the way you'd examine a spill. "The chairs. They're darling, but they're a bit optimistic, aren't they? Structurally." She smiled. "I only mention it because if the staff can't trust them, who can?" Somebody laughed. It was worse than the sentence. "And the gowns come back from her hands, stretched," Camilla went on, tipping her head. "I did wonder. You do try them, don't you? When we're not looking? I'd forgive it. God knows there's nothing in this room in your size, sweetheart, so I understand the temptation to just test things." The heat came up Nora's neck like a hand. 9 years of it. 9 years of being the joke that funded a ventilator. "Camilla," Gerald said, delighted, "be nice. I'm being concerned." And then Gerald Thorne, who had drunk 5 glasses of Ashford money, reached out and took Nora by the upper arm, squeezed it actually jovially, the way a man handles livestock at a county fair, and turned her toward the semicircle like an exhibit. "She's not offended," he announced. "She's a good sport. Tell him you're a good sport, Nora." She could feel every eye. She could feel the pins in her wrist cushion. She thought very clearly about the tendon on the inside of his elbow and how little pressure it would actually take. She said nothing. That was the part that would have killed her later. That she had said nothing. "Take your hand off her." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even particularly firm. Damiano Vitale had spoken at ordinary conversational volume from 6 feet away, and the room went out like a struck match. Gerald's hand opened. He hadn't decided to open it. Nora watched him look at his own fingers with mild confusion, as though they'd been borrowed. "Mr. Vitale," he said, "we were only— touch her again and I'll send you back in pieces," Damiano said, without raising his voice, and adjusted his cuff. "That's not a temper. I don't have one. That's a schedule." Nobody breathed. A violin, 4 rooms away, kept playing to an audience that had ceased to exist. Damiano turned to Camilla. He looked at her for a long moment with something almost like scientific interest. And Nora watched a woman who had been cruel in public since the age of 6 discover that there was a floor beneath the floor. "You have a habit," he said, "of making a room laugh at whoever can't answer you. It's the only talent you have, and you use it like a rich man uses money." He nodded, once, as if filing it. "I'll remember it. I remember everything. It's the whole job." Then he turned to Nora, and everything in his face rearranged itself, and it was somehow more frightening than the rest. "Your arm," he said quietly. "Does it hurt?" "No," she said. "That's a lie. It's a good one." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Come with me. You can leave with me, or you can leave with your dignity, and I'd like you to have both, but I'm only able to guarantee one." Gerald Thorne fired her before she reached the coat check. He did it by text message, which said a great deal about Gerald Thorne. She read it standing under the customs house awning while the rain came off the harbor sideways, and she laughed, one short, ugly sound with no floor under it, because Margaret's next infusion was Thursday and there were $411 in the account. The car was black and low and idling like something asleep. Enzo Marchetti held the door. "He fired you," Damiano said when she was inside. "Not a question. By text." Of course by text. He was quiet for a block. The city ran down the glass. Vitale Group holds paper on Thorne's building, his atelier, and his ex-wife's alimony. Say the word, and by Monday he's selling his mother's furniture in a parking lot. "That's not a favor," Nora said. "That's a leash." He turned his head. It was the first time all night she'd interested him. Say more. Favors are free. You don't do free. Her heart was going hard, but her voice, thank God, was flat as a table. So it's a leash. I'd just like to know which end I'm on. Damiano Vitale looked at her for a long moment. Rainlight slid across his jaw. 9 days, he said. The Ashford Trust puts on the Prescott Gala at the end of the week, and every man I need in a room and cannot legally be seen approaching will be added. I need a woman on my arm who nobody can dismiss and nobody can predict. Camilla Ashford has been auditioning for that chair for 2 years. I'd rather burn the chair. And what do I get? Your mother's treatment paid through the year, and a number you can call at 3 in the morning. Nora Bennett looked out at the harbor, at the black water and the crane light sand, out there in the dark past the fish pier, a brick warehouse with a new name painted on the side. No, she said. The car seemed to get quieter. I want something else. She turned. Cesare Bruno. The change in him was very small and very total. Enzo's eyes came up in the mirror. Say that again, Damiano said softly. 9 years ago, Cesare Bruno put contraband in my father's container and let him die waiting for a trial, and then bought his company at auction for 11 cents on the dollar. Her voice didn't shake. She'd been rehearsing it into a mirror since she was 22. Everyone knows. Nobody can do anything because nobody has anything. But you sit at tables with him. You get invited to his house. You want me to kill him. I want him to lose, Nora said. I want him to sit in a room and watch every single thing he stole get taken back by hand while he's still awake to feel it. I want the last thing he understands to be that the seamstress did it. Silence. Rain. That's not a favor either, Damiano said at last. That's a partnership. Those are much harder to leave. I know. You understand what my world does to people who lean on it. I've been standing in the rain outside it for 9 years, Nora said. I'll take the roof. He put out his hand. She took it. His palm was warm and dry, and there were scars across 3 knuckles, old ones, and she thought, this is where the road forks, and I am choosing. 9 days, Damiano Vitale said. Where's something they'll have to look at? Fabian Cross arrived Tuesday with a rack and an opinion. He was the most in-demand stylist in the city, and he circled Nora twice in the mirrored room on the 4th floor of Damiano's house before he spoke, tapping his lip. So architectural black, long lines, structured, and we bring the eye up. Something with a bit of a drape here to hide the waist. Forgiving. He said it kindly. That was the thing about Fabian. He always said it kindly. The goal is that nobody's looking at the body at all. Then what are they looking at? Damiano asked from the doorway. Fabian laughed. Mr. Vitale, trust me. With her frame, the whole trick is minimizing. Say the last part again, Damiano said. The part about hiding her. The room temperature dropped about 6 degrees. Fabian's mouth stayed open. She's walking into a room where 4 men have wondered for a decade whether I can be moved. Damiano said and crossed to the rack and pushed the black gowns aside one by one with the back of his hand like a man clearing a table of dead flowers. You're proposing I bring an apology. Get out of my house. He turned to Nora when the door closed. What do you want? Nobody had asked her that in 9 years. Not once. She had to wait a second before she could answer without her voice doing something humiliating. Emerald, she said. Silk crepe. Not chiffon. Chiffon's a coward's fabric. It clings and lies. Cut on the bias. Sleeves to the elbow, because my arms are strong and I'm done pretending they're a rumor. She turned to the mirror and looked at herself, really looked, and put her hand flat on her own hip like a woman marking a boundary line. And no shapewear. Let them see the actual shape of the actual person. If they can't handle it, that's information about them. Damiano Vitale watched her in the glass with an expression she couldn't name. I'll get you a workroom, he said. Make it yourself. She did. She made it in 4 nights with her mother's shears. And when she came down the stairs on the 9th night, Enzo Marchetti, who had spent a professional lifetime being unmoved by things, took his hands out of his pockets. She had learned things during those 9 days, in the hours between fittings. She learned that Damiano slept badly and read history in the kitchen at 4 in the morning in reading glasses, which nobody alive was supposed to know. She learned that he had been 11 when his father was shot in front of him in a barber shop on Salem Street, and 13 when he understood that everyone at the funeral had already decided he'd be dead by 20. She learned that he had a scar under his hairline. He touched when he was lying and that he never lied to her, which meant she got to watch him not touch it over and over, like a small daily gift. "Why do they say your name that way?" She asked him once, at 3 in the morning, both of them at the counter with cold coffee. "Because I only ever had to do it 4 times, he said. "The trick isn't cruelty. Cruelty's loud, and loud men die. The trick is that everyone believes you'll be exact." He turned the cup a quarter turn. It's a terrible way to live. You become the story instead of the man. And then one night a woman gets her arm grabbed and you find out you're still in there somewhere, and it's inconvenient. Inconvenient, Nora repeated. Extremely. He looked at her. There was nothing safe in it at all. "You should understand what you're standing next to. I'm not misunderstood, Nora. I've done everything they say. Some of it twice. I know. That should frighten you." "It does," she said. "It doesn't stop me. Those are different departments." He laughed. Actually laughed. A startled, rusty sound, like a door that hadn't moved in years. And the way he looked at her afterward followed her upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed all night. The Prescott Gala was where the first blow landed. It was Nora's idea, which was the part she kept, later, like a coin in her pocket. Eleanor Prescott chaired the Mercy Colonnade Board and had spent 11 years steering the hospital's endowment through a charity vehicle that Cesare Bruno had underwritten from the beginning. A lovely, clean fountain of money for the man who owned the harbor, dressed as compassion. Nora had spent 9 years in fitting rooms. Rich women talk in fitting rooms. They talk because you're not a person. "Prescott has a second signature line," she told Damiano and Enzo, spreading her notes across the table. "She's been moving the pediatric fund through a subsidiary to cover a shortfall in the Bruno endowment, and she's been panicking about it since March. Her assistant told my colorist. Her colorist told me. Because I'm furniture." She looked up. "You don't have to threaten her. She's already terrified. You just have to be the first person to say it out loud." Damiano read the notes for 90 seconds. "Enzo," he said, "in 9 years, has anyone at this table brought me a better plan than this?" "No, boss," Enzo said. "Nora did it herself. That was the condition." She crossed the marble at the Prescott Gala in bias-cut emerald, with her spine like a mast, and the room turned to look at her. Not past her, at her. And she took a glass of water she had no intention of drinking and stood beside Eleanor Prescott at the balustrade and said conversationally, "The Pediatric Fund. March. Do you want to hear the number, or do you already know it?" Eleanor Prescott's face came apart in 11 seconds. Nora counted. 3 days later, the Globe had it. 2 days after that, Prescott resigned and the endowment froze, which meant $9 million of Bruno money stopped moving and had to surface somewhere, in daylight, where anyone could see it. Cesare Bruno had to reach for it with his own hand. And a hand out in the open is a hand you can break. Camilla Ashford came for her on a Thursday, in the atrium of the very hospital where Margaret Bennett was breathing through a mask. "You think this is a life," Camilla said. She'd been drinking. She looked, Nora noticed with no pleasure whatsoever, like something left out in the weather. "You think he kept you. He's using you to make a point at me. That's all this is, and when the point's made—" "Camilla," Nora didn't raise her voice. She'd learned that from someone. "Your father lost the Ashford building in 2019, and you've been living on the story of who you used to be ever since. You made fun of my body in a room full of people, because it was the only thing in your life you could still get a laugh out of." She held the elevator door. "I'm not going to do anything to you. That's the part you should be afraid of. You're going to do it all yourself, and I'm going to be too busy to watch." She let the doors close on Camilla Ashford's face. It was, she'd think later, The single most expensive thing she ever gave away for free. They came for her on the 14th of December. There was a man in the room. That was the whole of it. She came out of her mother's hospital room at 9 at night, and there was a man by the window at the end of the corridor who was not staff, and not family, and not waiting for anyone. And every one of Nora's nerves stood up at the same time. She had spent her life reading bodies. His was wrong. Too still. Hands empty and ready. Later, Enzo would tell her they called him Cain, and that he'd done 19 of these and never missed. He wasn't there for Nora. He was there because at 9:15 Damiano Vitale came up the back stairs to bring her mother flowers. Actual flowers, orange ones, because Nora had mentioned once that Margaret hated lilies, and he came up alone, because the only person who knew he'd be there alone was Renzo Fontana. Nora saw Cain's shoulder drop toward his coat, and there was no time to shout, so she did the only thing her hands knew how to do fast. The thread snips were on her belt. She'd worn them every working day for 9 years. She put them into the meat of his forearm to the hilt, and while he was still deciding to scream, she took the fire extinguisher off the wall bracket with both hands and swung it like she was splitting wood. Her arms were strong. She had been telling people that for years. Damiano came through the stairwell door into a corridor with a man on the floor and Nora Bennett standing over him with an extinguisher, breathing hard. Emerald silk sprayed dark across the front, absolutely steady. She had never seen him move like that. What happened to Cain in the next 40 seconds happened fast and quiet, and Nora did not look away. Because she'd chosen this, and looking away would have been a lie. Then Damiano's hands were on her face, shaking, actually shaking. The most feared man in the city, with his hands going like a boy's, checking her over, her arms, her throat, saying her name once. He wasn't here for me, Nora said. Damiano. He was here for you. And only 3 people knew where you'd be. I know, he said. It's Renzo. I know. His forehead came down against hers. He shut his eyes. I've known for 6 days. I needed him to reach, and I let him reach, and he reached at you. His voice did something she'd never heard it do. I used you as the bait, and I will never forgive myself for it, and I'd do it again to end this. Tell me to go, right now, and I'll put you somewhere he can't find you, and you'll never see me again. Nora Bennett took a fistful of his ruined shirt and pulled him down and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was not a beginning. It was a woman claiming a thing that everyone had spent 31 years telling her she was not allowed to want. And his hands went into her hair, and he made a low broken sound against her mouth like something finally putting its weight down. No, she said against his lips. We finish it. Together. And then, Damiano. Then you never lie to me about anything. Ever. For the rest of your life. Done, he said. The reckoning took 9 minutes. Cesare Bruno kept an office above a linen supply on the harbor because he was 71 and believed the old ways worked. And they had, right up until they didn't. Nora walked in beside Damiano at 10 in the morning with a folder under her arm. Enzo shut the door. Salvatore Conti, who had counseled the Vitale family for 40 years and had voted against Nora twice, sat down in the corner and, at the end, would stand up. Renzo Fontana was already in the chair. He'd been in it a while. He was still trying to smile. Boss, he said, Damiano, whatever she told you, you moved 11 kilos through Bennett Marine in 2016. Damiano said, on Cesare's order. You picked Thomas Bennett because he was clean and slow and had no cousins. You've been on Bruno's payroll for a decade, and you've been in my house every Sunday for 8 years. And you brought my mother candied orange at Christmas. He said it all in the same even tone he'd used to order lunch. The candied orange is the part I keep coming back to. Renzo stopped smiling. Nora put the folder on Cesare Bruno's desk and opened it herself. Then she sat on the edge of that desk. She, who had spent her life being asked to make herself smaller, and looked at a 71-year-old man until he looked back. You sent lilies to his funeral, she said. Do you remember? You wouldn't. It was a Tuesday. You sent lilies and you were in the paper that week talking about the pediatric wing. Girl, Bennett Marine had a seal. My father's seal. Only 3 sets of hands touched a bonded container. She turned a page. Bruno Coastal is a wholly owned subsidiary of a charity vehicle that just got frozen. So every dollar you've moved in 11 years is sitting in a room where the U.S. attorney can see it. And this morning at 8:40, Renzo Fontana's proffer went in. She turned another page. He gave you up before his coffee got cold. He gave you up fast, Cesare. It took him 4 minutes. You gave that man 40 years. Cesare Bruno looked at Renzo. Renzo Fontana looked at his shoes. And Nora watched a man understand in real time that his life had been taken apart by a woman he had never once bothered to look at. You want me to beg, Cesare said. God, no, Nora said. I want you to be awake for it. The indictment came down in March. 14 counts. Bruno Coastal went into receivership, and the brick warehouse on the Chelsea side went to auction. And a woman with a very quiet corporation bought it for cash and had the new paint stripped off the side by hand, down to the ghost letters underneath which still read Bennett Marine Bunded, and always had, under everything the whole time. Gerald Thorne's atelier folded in April. His last public act was a very long email. Nobody finished. Camilla Ashford moved to Palm Beach, which is what Boston does, instead of a sentence. Renzo Fontana got his deal. And 11 years and a name nobody in that city will say out loud at a table. Margaret Bennett saw her daughter married in September, from a chair in the front row, with oxygen tucked discreetly under a shawl she'd sewn herself and her hand crushing Grace Molina's the entire time. Salvatore Conti stood up and blessed it in 2 languages and did not look at his shoes once. Nora wore emerald, not white. Everybody understood. And when Damiano Vitale said his vows in that voice that never had to rise, half the men in that garden went very still. Because he said, I will be exact about her for as long as I'm breathing. And every single one of them knew precisely what the word exact meant when he used it and understood that the woman in the green dress was no longer a person you could reach. They spent 9 years looking straight through Nora Bennett, and it never once occurred to them that she was standing close enough to hear every word, and close enough, eventually, to use it. That's the thing about the people you decide aren't worth your attention. You hand them the whole map and never notice they took it. So be careful who you make small in a room. She might just be measuring you for something. If Nora's reckoning gave you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who's tired of watching heroines wait to be rescued. And subscribe for the next story. Comment below and tell me, who should Nora come for next?